Tonight on this special Faith Nation, we are taking a look back at the Supreme Court in 2018. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. The Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh captured the attention of America this fall. That as the president's pick to sit on the high court faced sexual assault allegations and a dramatic Senate hearing pitting him against one of his accusers.
Despite weeks of protests, Kavanaugh was eventually confirmed and took his place on the United States Supreme Court. Amber Strong takes us back with this look from just days after the Senate approved him as an Associate Justice.
On this vote, the ayes are 50, the nays are 48.
And with that, Brett Kavanaugh becomes the 114th Justice of the United States Supreme Court. But the bitter battle leading to that confirmation has consequences for the midterms and beyond. With protest and sexual assault allegations, Kavanaugh's confirmation came down to a handful of senators. The pivotal vote, Susan Collins of Maine, who thought Kavanaugh should withdraw after hearing Dr. Christine Ford's testimony.
But then when he came back with such a forceful denial and the anger and anguish that he showed, and then the lack of corroboration, led me back to the fundamental issues that are fundamental to our legal system, a presumption of innocence.
The backlash from Collins' decision is yet to be seen. Although she's not up for re-election this year, a site raising money for her 2020 challenger crashed after the announcement. So far, it's raised more than $3.5 million. While the GOP won the confirmation battle, both sides are determined to win the war for the control of Congress. Republicans say the Democrats' tactics are reigniting the party ahead of midterms.
We have been energized.
The tactics that have been employed both by Judiciary Committee Democratic senators and by the virtual mob that's assaulted all of us in the course of this process has turned our base on fire.
Democrats say the anger seen by scores of protesters on the Hill, many of which are women, will have a long-term impact.
It is the people who are sitting in the Senate that they've elected who are making these decisions, and they're going to go to the polls and they're going to vote differently.
While some Democrats, including Congressman Jerry Nadler, toy with the idea of investigating and possibly impeaching Kavanaugh should the Democrats take the House, others say the party should be focused on the election and healing the divide.
The Senate's role in our politics is not to just reflect the country, but to help heal and lead the country, and that's the course we should be on.
Now Kavanaugh will attend a swearing-in ceremony Monday at the White House with President Trump, and his first vote could come as early as Tuesday.
And we are joined now by senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand and Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Abigail, you were at the Capitol for these Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, and you were also there for these sexual assault hearings. What was it like to be up there and in the midst of all of this?
It was ugly. It was very intense. There were, for weeks, protesters inside the Capitol, outside the Capitol, just everywhere. Lawmakers were literally hiding from the media. Some lawmakers even had to get police escort. And at the heart of this were two families who were deeply affected. And every story we were putting out, you would have to remember, like, there were real lives that were just everything we were reporting that were really affected, and their lives were just turned upside down, both Dr. Ford's family and the Kavanaughs, and that was hard sometimes.
I think you really, it brings home what we're several months removed, but it really makes you remember about the Dr. Ford, of course, but also Kavanaugh's two girls who said, let's pray for Dr. Ford. Paul, in all your years of covering Washington politics, have you ever seen anything like the Kavanaugh confirmation process?
I have rarely seen anything like this, but what I'm afraid about is that this could change all the hearings from now on. What's funny is that in the olden days, Supreme Court justices would get passed with like 96, 97% of the senators voting for them. And now I'm worried that it's just going to be, are you a Democrat nominee or a Republican nominee? Are you red or are you blue? And whatever it takes to try to stop you, we will do it. And things will be dragged out of any possible closet. I'm just worried that the tenor of the whole thing is going right downhill from this point on.
Yeah, in this process, we didn't see a lot of bipartisanship, but there were some glimmers in there. I think about Jeff Flake and how he kind of held up the process. Paul, what's your sense of any bipartisanship that we saw in this process?
That was it, and a lot of people were mad about Jeff Flake on that because basically what he was saying with Democrat Coons was that we do need to have an FBI investigation. And the thing is that Kavanaugh had already been investigated by the FBI, what was it, 6 times before? It just seemed like it was all just for show. But I'm hoping that maybe as we see more and more of this sort of thing that's just ranked by this partisanship, that maybe more and more senators over the years will sort of rise above it and say, what can I do to try to bring a little more civilization to this process?
Maybe this is a question both Paul and Abby, you both can weigh in on, but before the sexual assault allegations came forward, Kavanaugh's support really fell along party lines, with Democrats vowing to vote against him. What was the single motivating factor that made them decide that he was not going to get their vote?
Well, I think the single motivating factor was that he was President Trump's nominee. We saw some Democratic senators come out before President Trump even nominated someone to say they were going to vote against anyone that President Trump nominated to the bench. And then the night of when President Trump did announce his pick was Judge Kavanaugh, we saw them with protesters with whiteboards at rallies with Democratic senators where they were filling in the blank for saying, I will not stand for, and then they just wrote Kavanaugh in after his name came forward. Every week they came out with a different reason, some saying that they believed Kavanaugh was going to protect the president from investigation. Every week there was a new thing. But the reality was when he went through his original hearing process, he came out looking pretty good and like a pretty substantial candidate. And there were some red state Democrats that we saw the Republicans courting, like Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Donnelly. And it looked for a little bit like they might support Judge Kavanaugh. But then once all the sexual assault allegations came forward, he lost all of them. And ultimately, we only saw Senator Joe Manchin vote for him, and he ended up being one of the only red state Democrats who survived his election.
In a way that gave them cover.
Yes.
Yeah, very important issue to so many people. Paul, what does this say for the next confirmation process that we see? Do you think this ugly battle that played out could keep really good potential Supreme Court justices from wanting to throw their hats in the ring?
I do. You have to imagine if this was you, if this was your family, would you want them to go through this? Would you want your kids to see this kind of thing happen to you in front of the entire world? But also, I think that one of the main reasons, at least as long as President Trump is president, that we're going to see this kind of thing going on is I think that the abortion topic is so important to folks on the left-leaning side that whoever they think may be a chance of being pro-life, they're going to come against him with everything they've got because they really feel right now with the conservatives the court starting to lean in a conservative direction, they're worried Roe v. Wade has had it. I don't think this is necessarily true. We just saw with the first decision on abortion that Judge Kavanaugh was a part of, Justice Kavanaugh, that he voted, no, we're not going to take up this topic. So I don't think he is an automatic Roe v. Wade thing. So it's interesting. You never know where anyone's really going to land on this.
Yeah. Abigail, what's your sense? Do you think months later, lawmakers have finally moved on?
Well, it's so interesting. The emotions we saw these lawmakers express were very real, and it got very heated in that heating room, not just between Kavanaugh, Dr. Ford, and the senators, but also between the senators themselves. And I just spoke with Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware. He's on the Judiciary Committee, and he is a man of deep faith. He's the co-chair of the Senate Prayer Breakfast with Senator James Lankford. And it was so interesting because we talked about this and how are lawmakers moving on. And he said that when, in particular, Senator Lindsey Graham really attacked Democrats during the hearing, he felt like a lot of that was targeted and pointed at him. And he said he's been friends with Senator Graham for a long time, and he didn't want to move on. And he didn't really want to forgive him. And he said a couple days after the hearing, Senator Graham called him to talk about something about Israel, and he didn't want to return his phone call. And he explained to me how he prayed about it, and he realized that if they're going around the country or around the world talking about trying to encourage countries to move past their differences and restore relationships around the world, that he has to mend his relationship with Senator Graham. We have some great sound from that I think we're going to show you now.
There was a particularly heated exchange with Senator Graham, who I have traveled with, I've legislated with, I'm fairly close to Senator Graham, and that was a particularly hard moment for me. Maybe it wasn't directed at me, but it certainly felt that way from 10 feet away. And it wasn't a week later, I was in his office. He asked me to come meet with Jared Kushner in his office to hear a presentation of the peace plan by the administration. And I came home and, my wife said, "What are you doing meeting with Lindsey Graham?" And I said, "Honey, I'm still mad about the Kavanaugh hearings. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm still upset about that. But it was a meeting about peace." And, my job is to figure out a way to keep working with Senator Graham on the things that we share and we care about and are important to our country. And over time, have some conversations with him about how are we reconciled on this. It is not easy to get over some of the fights we have here. But that's what I think the people of Delaware hired me to do, is to stick to principle on issues of core principle, but work across the aisle and find ways to respect each other and work together.
And I think that just gives us something that we can all be praying for, just unity and healing for the lawmakers, because we do need them to work together. We do need to encourage bipartisanship, and I think we really need to be praying for them.
A resounding amen, now more than ever. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson and senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand, thank you for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
And as Paul was saying, after the Kavanaugh fight, it's hard to imagine another confirmation battle, but one will be coming eventually. President Trump could get a chance to nominate another justice, and others will follow. The kind of divisiveness the nation witnessed during the last confirmation process isn't likely to let up. As Paul Strand reports, it became a central issue in the lead-up to the midterm elections.
As we now know, Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation battle was so vicious, it's become a major election issue for both sides. But what happens next time? Will the process stay the same or maybe get even worse? Constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis watched the latest confirmation process with dismay.
To see how just incredibly evil the process was, and to see just the screaming and the interruptions of the Senate.
Policy analyst Jeff Hunt of Colorado Christian University also found it disturbing.
It was clear all throughout the Kavanaugh hearings where they're banging on the doors of the U.S. Supreme Court. They're in violent protests.
Hunt and Ellis believe pro-abortion forces attack so furiously because of their panic about what a conservative majority on the court might do to Roe versus Wade.
Women want to have the so-called right to choose, and Kavanaugh is representing everything that the left fears.
This was really just about stopping somebody who might be pro-life, who would look at the Constitution in an original intent way.
That's why a conservative like Judge Amy Coney Barrett, a known pro-life Catholic and constitutionalist, could face even worse attacks if nominated. A number of senators made her faith an issue during her confirmation to a federal appeals court.
She's a woman, and so the attack will be different, but she's a very openly faith-based woman. She's a mom. She's very pro-life. And as Senator Feinstein said, the dogma lies loudly within you. That's going to be partially the attack. And that type of political animosity really has no place in our confirmation hearing process.
Hunt says Barrett or any other pro-life constitutionalist will likely face an onslaught from the left in the Senate and media.
They want to stop them because of their judicial philosophy. And so with Amy, you would get someone who looks at the Constitution and wants to interpret the Constitution according to its original intent. But they're going to throw everything they possibly can to stop it.
Writer David Carter recently observed on the conservative website Ricochet.com, the attempted wholesale destruction of Brett Kavanaugh, consisting as it did of lurid, fact-free allegations of the worst kind, ultimately revealed itself to be nothing less than a desperate attempt to keep off of the Supreme Court anyone who might demonstrate fidelity to the Constitution as written. And David French wrote in National Review, many of his, Kavanaugh's, accusers were operating in blatant, obvious bad faith. They were willing, eager even, to destroy him to keep him off the Supreme Court.
That's horrible. We are better as a society and as a country than just trying to seek to destroy someone's reputation solely to win political battles.
Anyone's faith is supposed to be off limits when they're considered for public office, but people's faith has come under attack more and more these days. Even Pastor Andrew Brunson praying at the White House after his release from Turkey.
A couple of the senators remarking how it was so great that he prayed with President Trump in the Oval Office. There was a lot of Twitter attacks against a couple of senators for saying, as a senator and in the Oval Office, there's this separation of church and state. I mean, they're trying to make this the new norm.
What can people of faith do to battle this trend? Ellis says one of the most important ways is to vote, or you may see your rights decay.
If we don't speak truth into our culture and we don't make sure that we are electing the people to best represent and protect our rights in the midterms and in 2020 and beyond, then yes, we're going to start seeing that. We need to be involved in our families and our churches, but also in our civil society. We are members of America, and we need to make sure that we participate.
Voting in those midterms is already happening across the country, and the final day to vote is Election Day itself, November 6th. Paul Strand, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Coming up, a closer look at the Supreme Court case that led to abortion becoming legal. Before the allegations against Kavanaugh, much of the opposition to the now Associate Justice centered around what his confirmation would mean for abortion in America.
Well, you might be surprised that many Americans don't even know Roe v. Wade is the Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion. And as Paul Strand reports once again, they fiercely oppose losing Roe because they think it's been part of America since the country's founding.
Lawyer Steve Aden takes up the abortion fight at Americans United for Life. When it comes to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, though, Aden and others argue he'll be good for America because of his views on the Constitution.
He cares more about what the Constitution actually says than about what the Supreme Court has said it says.
Those against Kavanaugh focus on one thing: fear that a Justice Kavanaugh would mean the end to Roe v. Wade, one of the Supreme Court's most controversial rulings.
Roe v. Wade may be right at the center of all the controversy over Brett Kavanaugh, but the funny thing is how many people that support Roe don't really know what it's about.
A Pew poll found that 57% of 20-year-olds or folks in their 20s didn't even know that Roe was about abortion. It's a bumper sticker. If you put a microphone in somebody's face and say, do you support Roe versus Wade? What they hear is, do you support women's rights?
This research shows many younger Americans believe the 1973 ruling that legalized abortion goes all the way back to the nation's founding.
Linda Lake, a Democratic pollster, said on the media recently that most millennials think that Roe versus Wade occurred shortly after the American Revolution. The point is that they're completely disconnected from their history.
When asked specific questions about abortion, the majority oppose it.
They have seen their siblings on ultrasound growing in the womb, and you can't tell them that those babies are blobs of tissue.
And as Aden points out, more are refusing to get abortions.
Over the last 25 years, you have a 40% drop in the abortion rate in America. Today, the abortion rate in America is the same as it was in 1972, the year before Roe versus Wade.
For those who fear Kavanaugh in the court, Aden points out even if the justices overturn Roe v. Wade, it just means the abortion issue will return to the states. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Arlington, Virginia.
Well, Kristen Hawkins of Students for Life joins us now for more. Kristen, of course, abortion has long been a divisive topic in America. The confirmation process of now Supreme Court Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh didn't help that, but do you think that what role did it play in at least bringing abortion to the forefront?
You know, I think it was critical when you looked at all the controversy here in Washington surrounding his nomination. It was all about abortion. All the protesters who gathered outside the Supreme Court, who interrupted the Senate Judiciary hearings, they were there because they want to see abortion enshrined in our Constitution. They want to force taxpayers to pay for abortion. So I think it actually helped when you look at the midterm elections because we showed very clearly what the other side is about and the extremists that they are on this issue.
With Brett Kavanaugh, many thought with his appointment that this would really kind of do away with the whole abortion issue. But just recently, we saw the Supreme Court not take up a case that involved abortion funding. What did you make of that, and kind of explain to our viewers what that whole, what their decision was?
It was incredibly disappointing, and I think it was a huge missed opportunity for the Supreme Court to take up this case. I think, though, this isn't the last we're going to see of a case like this, because there's other cases similar to this case making their way up in the lower court. So for me, it's not really a question of if, but when the Supreme Court is going to take up this decision. I don't know why Justice Kavanaugh sided with the pro-abortion liberals on the court on this. We can only hope for the best, and what I've been telling everybody is continue to pray. Pray that these Supreme Court justices have the courage they're going to need to overturn Roe in our lifetime. And so that's why I think we have to continue to pray for these Supreme Court justices, that they have courage, and really why we really need to be hoping that we get at least one more Supreme Court appointment in President Trump's tenure.
Kristen, were you surprised not only by Kavanaugh but also Chief Justice Roberts and their decision not to hear this case?
No, I wasn't surprised by Chief Justice Roberts' decision. Obviously in the Obamacare hearings, he sided with the pro-abortion side of the court. He wants to basically take the court away from hot topic controversial issues. I think he's playing a losing game because we know this is what the Supreme Court is here for, and we have a divided country on very important issues that are controversial. So sadly, I wasn't surprised by where he stood.
Why is it so important for you? Why do you believe that Planned Parenthood needs to be defunded?
Well, Planned Parenthood is $1 billion abortion business. They commit more abortions than any other abortion vendor in the world. They commit over 321,000 in the United States this year, and yet they receive $500 million. So half of their funding comes from us taxpayers, making us all morally culpable for what goes on behind those Planned Parenthood doors.
Yeah, critics will say, it's not just abortion, but it's a lot of other women's health kind of issues that Planned Parenthood provides for and helps with. What would be your argument toward that?
Well, it's very simple. No one goes to Planned Parenthood for a flu shot. Women go to Planned Parenthood for a specific reason, and that is to end their pregnancy, to abort their child when they are in crisis, when they have no other place to go. We have more than 8,000 federally qualified health centers that we already fund that provide all of these services across the country.
And the president, he campaigned on getting conservative pro-life judges. Have you been seeing that have an effect when it comes to abortion in America?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's one of the greatest victories we'll see from this presidency is the appointment of pro-life, of conservative of judges, just in all, not only in the Supreme Court, but in all the lower courts too. We saw this weekend there was a judge in Texas who ruled that Obamacare is now unconstitutional. You're going to see more and more cases like this because what they're doing is trying to fundamentally reshape the courts, because this is where the abortion advocates always defeat us. It's in the courts. A state legislature will pass a pro-life bill restricting abortion, and instantly they sue, they go to a court, they go to a judge who's their friend, and then there's an injunction. So the will of the people is never really fully expressed because of these courts.
We're going to have to leave it there. Kristen Hawkins with Students for Life, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me today.
When we come back, I'll look at the fallout of a religious liberty case that won big at the Supreme Court. Masterpiece cake shop baker Jack Phillips had a big win for religious liberty at the Supreme Court, but that hasn't stopped Colorado from going after him again.
This time it's for him refusing to bake a cake to mark a transgender changing from male to female. Now he is suing the state. Paul Strand looks at why his battles with Colorado matter so much for all Christians.
Baker Jack Phillips, all he wants to do is make cakes, but it seems all Colorado wants to do is make trouble for Jack.
The state agency acting against Phillips lost here at the U.S. Supreme Court, with justices specifically blasting it for hostility toward Phillips' religious beliefs. Now the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is going after the Christian baker again, this time for refusing a transgender celebration cake.
At this point, they're just targeting Christians. This is outright Christian persecution.
This time around, though, constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis believes the commission will be more subtle.
The Masterpiece decision was very particular to the commission to say you cannot be overtly hostile. So now what they're doing is they're just going to say, well, we won't be as obvious about our hostility, but we still want to go after Jack.
Meanwhile, Phillips and his lawyers are going on offense by suing the Colorado bureaucrats.
They are actually striking back and saying, this is just outright persecution. You're not interested in stopping discrimination. You're interested in hunting Christians down.
If Christians are always only on the defensive, then we're going to continue to lose ground eventually. We have to be also making sure that we're standing up and we're standing forward.
Ellis and Hunt warned people of faith should be deeply concerned about their religious freedom, given some of today's leaders and officials.
Even after the Colorado Civil Rights Commission heard from the U.S. Supreme Court in a 7-2 decision, including Obama appointees telling them to stop targeting people of faith, the government essentially ignored it.
This is about whether or not the government can compel you or me to say something and to embrace and celebrate messages that go against our sincerely held religious beliefs.
Jack Phillips is very much a canary in the coal mine with regards to the very legal issues, very important legal issues that we're going to be facing.
So why care about this one baker and his little Masterpiece cake shop in a suburb of Denver? Because if you hold certain beliefs and you're a Christian, you could be the next Jack Phillips.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.